As you already said, my work is called Generation and Simulation of Artificial Human Societies using anthropological model learning agents. My name is Radu Galan, and I was mentored by Dr. Tsibula Gabriela. We'll begin with an introduction to present the initial plan and the idea with motivation, then proceed with the project methodology, an implementation and result. In the end, we'll draw some conclusions, especially for future work. As I said, let's first introduce the project. And I'll first talk about what is this. We actually built an anthropological social simulation using an agent-based system. And essential to this work are basically the models of humans and the environment, which are as accurate as possible. Then the architecture, which needs to allow easily addition of new types of agents, new dynamics, new roles, and also the visualization, which is essential because, well, statistics don't tell the entire story every time. Now, by anthropological model, I mean creating a realistic and scientific computational model of a human. And by an agent-based system, obviously, I mean a classical environment populated with agents that sense, think, and act. And by taking that computational model into a spatially explicit environment, we want to get a simulation that could represent a real human society. And I also want to talk about why this is relevant. In general, we create simulations to answer questions. And social simulation will answer sociological questions about human behavior, cognition, politics, like what is the best kind of government, what is the best educational system, how can we improve communication or optimize society. We want to detect, predict, and prevent. We basically want to understand ourselves a little better and also understand a little bit of the environment, because we know how many issues there are to be solved that require attention. I would like to present what Professor Denon describes artificial societies as. They offer insight into the relationship between micro-level cognition and macro-level social behavior. We might be able to predict some scenarios and calculate some effects, but until we manage to grow the societies of our own, Dr. Epstein says that we will not have the right to say we truly understand society. I would also like to go through the literature now. We, of course, have specific simulations that seek to optimize a certain specific metric, but they only simulate a subset of society. Some examples of this are evacuations, crowd control, traffic optimization, and market analysis. But where the beginnings of this field actually are, they begin with Conway's Game of Life and Schelling's segregation model. These are notorious basic rule simulations. And by adding more attributes and needs into this simulation, we can achieve work similar to what has been done in Sugarscape, which begins to construct proper models. And by adding more rules and dynamics, you can achieve complex social networks. Some really interesting work is being done, however, when spatially explicit concept rises. Now, simulations of entire animal populations have been done, like capuchins and jaguars. This is really, really interesting. But finally, the most relevant work to ours discovered are in touch with other types of populations, more precisely Australopithecus and Neanderthals. Now we know the what and we know the why. I would like to begin talking about the how. And we will follow our footsteps by answering some more questions. Who do we want to simulate? As we said, humans, Homo sapiens. But when do we want to simulate them? Well, actually, we are constrained because early sapiens have lived since about 500,000 years ago. So we're going to start there. Also, where do we simulate them? We want the continent of Europe. And since there are no traces of sapiens in Europe earlier than 100,000 years ago, we adjust the when. Also, what can we simulate? We need something viable. So not complex modern society, but rather a hunter-gatherer civilization. This means simulation can take place after the agricultural revolution. And it was it would also be better if the simulation would be somewhat balanced and uncontested by other hominins, especially. So we have to avoid the great extinction from 70,000 years ago and interactions with Neanderthals and Denisovans from 40,000, which puts us in the late Pleistocene. We should design the application with some facts in mind. We want the ability to repeat an experiment and the ability to scale it on different resolutions and agent count. We need modularity, speed, also, and parameterization. And in this flow diagram, we can see the major processes. We have the generation. We generate a population and an environment, and then we run an experiment. There were, of course, a few decisions that needed to be made. All of them included various sacrifices, because while simulating causality-based events makes for great justification in general, it will consume too many resources for large-scale timeframes. And we're talking here about years, even decades, centuries. So we chose an approach based mainly on probabilistic events to allow this scale. It was really important also to be able to include any new model component, and we had to trade high-speed performance for this generalization. This also meant that modeling more detailed components will result in longer computation, so we compromised simulation time for better modeling. And now, considering all the previous requirements and development compromises, the following architecture resulted. It is very important that everything revolves around the agent, of which we have actually two main types, the environment agent and the developing agent. All agents suffer changes in their attributes, and all agents experiment different dynamics, which are basically the physics of the environment. Now, only developing agents will experience cognition-based decision-making, which sometimes is followed by actions upon the world and the other agents. We also have a scheduler that synchronizes and orchestrates everything, and an experimenter that will simply load the parameters and initialize a new experiment. Now, the framework is in place, and the most important step will follow, which is the modeling phase. This can be done two ways. Iteratively means finding a good data set with values to emulate. Otherwise, research must be found that offer insight for precise probability distributions, so we can simulate that. We already mentioned the context, and we know the parameters, so we can begin by simulating the environment, by modeling the environment. We want to simulate Europe, so we should be more precise with coordinates, and by choosing a cylindrical map projection, we can also visualize the map. This should come in multiple resolution to allow the scale we've talked about, and we can see here that this spatially explicit terrain is actually constructed from multiple data sources. We have a merger between, first of all, terrain data from satellite imagery dataset. Here we have 4 labels. We have field, we have forest, shrubland, and ocean or sea. Now, we also adapted information from a study on prehistoric forest. We fill some deforested areas here because all the modern data sets are obviously with lack of ancient forest. And we also add a hydrography map that will add rivers, lakes, sea, and ocean to our map. After some processing and augmentation, replacing cities, the map will look something like this. We also added in as an attribute elevation and found the satellite data for altitude here. And whilst the terrain environment is not suffering dramatic change over time, the atmosphere does. It is important to simulate some level of climatic processes. However, for this work, it was first considered to simulate the climate altogether, but it does not really make sense for our time frame to use complex models. We experimented with this simple free cell model adaptation, on which we created a rudimentary experiment to cancel the theory. And we also tried considering a WRF model, but it has no viable computational time limits for our time scale again. We decided it is best to emulate using a complex data set we found. We have over 20 years of modern data set that can be reiterated, and on a 8-day time step, ideal for our time frame again. We extracted two main attributes, night temperature and day temperature. We also experimented with rain and humidity over time, but it did not bring relevant contributions. So, however, resources are very important since they're in strong correlation with what humans do. We considered many, and we already have water and vegetations modeled into the terrain. We wanted to add a food source. We added plants, and they have multiple types of them, each of them with different benefits for the humans digesting them. They also have multiple attributes, and there are two types of attributes. Some of them deal with the calculation of available food calories, and some of them with the plant population evolution. Now, in consequence, we will need two dynamics. As we can see on the left, we have two attributes that are changing for plants. We have the population, which decreases in the winter. It's seasonal. Some plants die, but not all of them. Then they multiply again in the spring. And also food quantity changes seasonally. We have obtained here a cycled equilibrium, exactly what we wanted. Finally, we add in the humans. We have a wide range of attributes here, mainly modeled around their needs and predisposition for them. They do have some dynamics like aging and need development for hunger, thirst, and reproductive need. These all need to be satisfied, otherwise their health, their emotional state will decrease over time. And to satisfy these needs, they have a wide range of actions available and even an internal memory. And down here, we also see them organized by tribes. This will also be one of their attributes. The actions, however, are rather important. Moving is obvious. They take the agent to a different cell with different resources and opportunities. Scavenging will take food from a resource from the environment and add it to the inventory, from where then they can eat it to cure hunger, a little bit of thirst, and prevent health from depleting. But also socializing is important because it means interacting with nearby humans. These neighboring relationship are constructed, and if a relationship is good, then it will create happiness, increase emotional state, and sometimes even create copulation, which satisfies the reproductive need. Now, if it's a bad relationship, sometimes they might even fight and they will take damage. I am going to walk through the steps now of the experimentation, and we're going to start seeing some visualization. This is the first test. To test the architecture, actually, we've created this experiment where we only had environment agents with one attribute of temperature and one dynamic of convection, just to be able to see that everything works fine. Then we added in the environment. We can see here the correct cycles forming, mainly due to temperature, which is perfect for our seasonal temperature variation and cycles. Over that, we add the resources. So we add in plants. Again, we can see the cyclic dynamics. Finally, we add in some humans, but they do not have experience or knowledge. They basically make random decisions on each iteration. They're not intelligent, but we gather their history and we construct a data set. Each data set will represent agents' mistakes, and we are going to label it based on the well-being of the human after the action, which will be sort of a satisfaction factor. And the data for each label is going to be constructed from the circumstances of the action, like relation attributes to target humans if it's about an interaction, like sex, relation quality, age. Also, the target surrounding environment, going to be temperature, elevation, if it's a forest or a lake, and even attributes of the actioning human, so the person engaging in an action, again, any needs attribute, age, sex, and so on. We need actually 4 different data sets for each of their actions. And then we're going to take the data sets and train decision trees for each action. Each agent is going to have one decision tree for each action. And also the tree depth will be varying, and this gives some humans more overfitting over the surroundings and other more underfitting and adaptability. Now we put in the trained humans. We basically let them imagine scenarios, think, and decide what seems to be the best choice for them. Here we also have the main visualizations. On the left, we can see a pretty college from a color mapping of attributes. Some of them are by tribe, some of them are personal for each individual. We can also see the geography and environment changing and the resources. On the right, we have here the global attribute histogram, which basically has a histogram for the entire population, and we can see how happy, how hungry they are. We can see they get hungrier and sadder and more sad in winter. Yeah, we need somehow to judge the correctness of this experiment. And currently in the field, validation is practiced by comparing to some emergent phenomenon of the simulation. And in our case, mortality made a lot of sense. We found some studies and we created a rudimentary simulation where people only die by a mortality chance. So all other interactions are deactivated, and we compared these results to repeated simulations on different population sizes. We applied some popular metrics and found some really interesting facts. Like, for example, people most of them die in the winter, and so there's the better accuracy right in the spring. We can see here a histogram again of each experiment for the metrics. Unfortunately, we do not have anything to compare to, but the errors are quite low. Now we approach the end of the presentation, and I would also like to explain what we obtained from this project. First of all, some of the contributions are obviously a pretty unique data set with many attributes and many data sets merged together. We also have very accurate models integrating psychological, anthropological factors. We have state-of-the-art validation for the experiments, and this might actually be one of the only spatially explicit social simulations, at least for early Homo sapiens. Now, we obviously have some limitations here because we're trying to simulate a society from inside the society, and we are limited by computational power. There are also some philosophical issues, but I think they will be solved with time. But what I look forward to, however, is actually growing this simulation, because there are many types of optimization, like uploading to cloud, that can be added. But the more interesting things are extending the modeling opportunities and experiment types. We can add in animals, more action, a wide range of technologies or cultural habits, and slowly take this after the agricultural revolution and maybe even after the industrial one. It's quite an underdeveloped field anyways. This has been my presentation. Thank you for your attention.